do. I'll use this one. And let me start V-Ray RT. The first thing you'll notice that when the image starts getting resolved, I can change my frame buffer size and the image will be resized automatically. So that's really handy because sometimes you want to increase the resolution and you don't want to go back to the render settings, restart the whole process. You can just drag the frame buffer. Of course, that's an option that can be disabled in case you don't want it. So now let me change the camera position a little bit. And I want to show you the following. So if I right-click in the frame buffer, previously I was getting the pixel info visible, so it was giving me information about the RGB values of the specific pixel. Now we have added a bunch of new options. Like the first one is select object. So I can basically click on an object inside the frame buffer and it will select the object inside of 3ds Max. So this is extremely handy. If you make your frame buffer bigger, it obscures your vision of the viewport. You can just select the object straight from here. Another really cool option is to get object material. So if I just enable it and click on something, 3ds Max will add the material to the material editor and it will add it independent of which material editor you use. If I have the slate editor enabled or visible, it will add it to the slate. So let me select the cup, for example. I have a multi-subtexture applied here, and I'll change the color of this one. And the last one will give you the ability to set focus point, again in the frame buffer. But in order to enable it, I have to go to my camera options and change one small thing. So I'm using a 3ds Max physical camera. Depth of field is enabled. But I have to switch the target distance from using the camera target to custom. And now, setting focus point will work nicely. So I can click on the cup and I'll get the focus point over there. If I click here on the pencil, the focus point will change automatically. So that's another really handy tool that you have at your disposal. So interactive lens effects, this again has to do with interactivity. Previously, if you wanted to apply the V-Ray lens effects in the frame buffer, you had to wait for the whole image to be resolved and finished rendering in order to enable them. Now in V-Ray 3.5, you can tweak the lens effects while the image is being rendered, either with buckets or using the progressive rendering engine. So the next one I want to show in 3ds Max. So in V-Ray 3, we wanted to enable people to start the render process, interrupt the render process, and then go back to where they basically interrupted it. So, and we called the feature resumable rendering. And in order to make it work, you have to do a couple of preparation steps. So let me walk you through that. I will go to the frame buffer rollout in the 3ds Max settings, and I have to save a temporary image. So that's the image which V-Ray will use to save your progress. I'll set a path, call it whatever. And then down at the bottom, I can enable resumable rendering. So now let me start the process. You'll see the light cache being calculated first, and then the buckets appear. So at any point, I can click the escape button, which will stop the whole process. I can close the frame buffer. I can close 3ds Max if I decide to. And the next time I render, V-Ray will just continue from where it left. And this rendering mode will work with buckets and with the interactive rendering mode, even though with the progressive, even though with the progressive it's much harder to see what exactly is going on. But if you decide to use it in animations, it can also be a really powerful tool because I can set a noise threshold to something really high, get a full sequence of noisy images with resumable rendering enabled, and then I can resume the whole process and all the images will just improve their quality. So this way I can get a quick preview to show my clients, for example, and then I can render with final quality without losing the rays which have been traced so far. So here I have an example. Here I have an example video which demonstrates the progressive rendering mode and resumable rendering. So you will see that in this video we actually stop the rendering and we close 3ds Max. And if I load it again, I'll be able to resume the process. Okay. Another thing which was basically pointed to us by users again was that the standard 3D materials, and not only V-Ray materials, but it doesn't matter which renderer you use, react in a really unnatural way when they're really blurry, when they're reflecting with really blurry reflection values, and when you look at them in an angle. So the V-Ray material will usually be really bright when you look at it in an angle. Even if it's too blurry, in reality you would expect this material to get a little bit dark when you look at it. And that's because of the micro bumps of the surface itself. That's why in V-Ray 3.5 we have added a small change called glossy Fresnel, which will make the difference between this and that. So your really blurry reflections will be slightly darker in an angle, and that's the natural thing that you would expect in the real world. Again, this option is enabled by default, and you will get the more natural results out of the box. So a brand new material was added, which is the all surface shader. This material became popular for shading skin of characters in the 3D community. It is available in V-Ray 3.5. Of course, it can work for characters, as you can see here, but it can also work for rendering plastic models, or even like translucent materials like candles or, for example, marble and so on, and it works quite nicely. The cool thing about the all surface is that it has multiple subsurface scattering layers that you can blend or texture, and on top of that it has multiple reflection layers. So it enables you to create really advanced shaders rather easily without having to connect multiple materials in a shading network. Another new material is the MDL material. That's a material definition language, a universal shader developed by NVIDIA. Now V-Ray users can take advantage of that, and if you have never used MDLs before, with the installation of V-Ray 3.5 we ship a bunch of MDLs in the V-Ray installation folder, which you can just test and see whether they work in your projects. The workflow for loading the MDLs is rather simple. You just create a V-Ray MDL material loader. If I find it, here it is. And then you load the file in it. So here I have loaded a bunch of MDLs. This is the file over here. And if I render, I'll get the correct result. And if I want to change MDL parameters, you can do that in the material editor. Okay. The VR scene importer is something that I was intending to demonstrate, like exporting a scene from SketchUp, importing it in 3ds Max. But this is something that you saw a couple of times today, so I'll just skip this step. We have the importer. You create an object like a V-Ray proxy, but instead of loading a proxy, you can load a VR scene, you'll get the geometry plus all the materials on top. Live VR rendering was also included in V-Ray 3.5, and this is a video showing a demonstration of that. So you can interact with your set in 3ds Max, looking at the final result using Oculus Rift. The technology is still slow because V-Ray has to render a huge spherical or cubic image, and it has to render one for the left eye and one for the right eye. But we have some plans of how we can improve it, and in the future we'll get much faster previews. Okay, and as I told you, we're moving in the GPU rendering direction quite a bit. A bunch of updates have been added in the service pack, which includes general GPU optimizations. The whole algorithm of the GPU render is much faster. On-demand MIP mapping, which will tell V-Ray that it has to resize your textures automatically, depending on the image resolution and the distance between the camera and the objects of interest. So if you have a bunch of huge textures, not enough memory on the GPU, V-Ray will automatically resize them and render them easily. Aerial perspective is also supported in here. So I want to show you a quick example of that. So here I have a set with really heavy geometry, huge textures. Those are proxy mountains. And if I click render, I'm using my mobile GPU, you will see that the speed in which this image is rendered is quite impressive. So here it goes. Also, I would have never been able to render that without the MIP map, automatic MIP mapping of the textures. Okay, so I'm running a little bit late on time, so I'll move quickly. The V-Ray Clipper made shadows, like made surfaces, are also working properly on the GPU right now. So if you have like a chair or something that you want to place upon a photographed background, you can render that on the GPU, and on top of that you can clip the mesh easily. So here I had a video example. The stochastic flakes are also supported and work as expected, and a bunch of other things as well. Another thing that came with V-Ray 3.5 is the new online licensing system, which ships with the installation of V-Ray. Now we have a really nice new web-based interface to manage your licenses. First of all, you can have an online license and use that web page to manage whether the license is used or not. But at the same time, even if you're using a dongle, this can be used as a manager for the dongle itself. So you no longer have to use the outdated license manager that shipped with V-Ray 2. So now I'll spend like 4 to 5 more minutes to give you a sneak preview of an upcoming update for V-Ray. This is actually the first time we're showing the features that you'll see, and you will be able to get them when V-Ray 3 Service Pack 6 comes and becomes available. So the first one, which is of course important, is we have full support for 3ds Max 2018. The V-Ray Light Select has been updated quite a bit, and now it can give you the full light contribution of a light or groups of lights and split it in a separate render element. This means that I can render a whole scene with many different lights split into V-Ray Light Selects, and I can change the lighting completely in the post-production stages. So here I have recorded a video of a scene that I'm rendering with many light selects set up. And what's interesting about this scene is that it's over bright. It's basically super bright. My concept here was that I'll render the scene with really intense lights, and I'll decide what kind of light intensity I want in the post-production stage. So here I did save the image, And I'll go to the 3ds Max folder and open a Nuke comp. So of course you can use the light selects with Photoshop, but what I usually do is I do my comps inside of Nuke. The process is really straightforward, so I think you'll understand it clearly. So this is my rendered image, and what I did was I extracted the contribution of the different lights in separate channels. When I combine all the lights, I get one-to-one replica of my beauty pass of my RGB image. And then with different grade nodes inside of Nuke, or basically disabling the different lights, I can relight my set, make it look like that, or like that, or even like that. So here I stopped the sun, enabled some artificial lights, added some colors for the artificial lights, and here's another example of the same workflow. So this whole process can be automated and can help you a lot. For example, I can render a whole animation as a daytime and nighttime setup combined in one, and then in post I can tweak between one or the other. And this can be done in After Effects, Nuke, or in Photoshop if it's a still image. Another new addition was the support for Cryptomate render element. So that's something you add in the render element stack, and it will create basically automatic masks for all the objects in your set. So you don't have to manually go and assign different IDs, object IDs, material IDs, render them and try to pick different objects afterwards in post. So here's a video of a standard workflow. So currently, if you want to have masks for all the materials or all the objects in the scene, you have to do something like that. So I'll assign 1,000 IDs, create various multimates, a bunch of those, and then I'll render the image. I'll have to extract the multimates in order to change colors of different objects. So now with the Cryptomate render element, you just go to render elements, you click add, find V-Ray Cryptomate, click OK, and you're good to go. The Cryptomate will create masks for all the objects in the set. Currently, the Cryptomate technology only works inside of Nuke, but I'm sure they'll change that in the future, and you'll have access to that inside of Photoshop, for example. So let me load the scene and show you what it looks like. Wow. Okay. So here's an image that I did render. And down here, this is the Cryptomate element. So what this one will let you do is go in here and pick different objects around the scene. And you can pick a single object or you can pick multiple objects. It will work just fine. After that, this will automatically create a mask that looks like that. And I can color the objects and proceed with my compositing, and that's basically for free. And it's super easy to set it up. So I can basically change colors easily. Another workflow which I was experimenting with is I can render image with the Cryptomate element, but with a single gray color applied to the whole set. And if I do so, I can start selecting different parts of the set afterwards, and I can start colorizing them. So this can work really great if you want to create concepts. Like if I want to quickly change and experiment with different colors, I can just render a V-Ray override material, apply to everything, use the Cryptomate to apply different colors and textures and Nuke, and then go back to 3ds Max and execute the same setup. Okay, and Okay, and the final feature, and I'll finish afterwards, is in V-Ray 3.6 we already have the CUDA engine, the GPU engine, running on the CPU. This means that you can actually render on the GPU and on the CPU together, so we have hybrid rendering. And on top of that, if you want to be rendering using your CPU, but looking at the features supported on the GPU, you can just enable the CUDA CPU, make your whole setup, and at the end of the day, you can switch to the other computer that has the Quadro cards, for example, and you're 100% guaranteed that the result will be exactly the same. So this one has two huge applications. First, you can render hybrid. Second, you can render on the CPU while you do your setups. And then when you switch to the GPU workstation, you can start rendering on the GPU, and you'll get exactly the same result as the one rendered on the CPU. And with this engine, it's 100% guaranteed. And in fact, that's the engine I used to render that kid's room, which was cut by the clipper previously. Okay, so that's basically it for this talk, guys. I'll be happy to answer questions. Unfortunately, I'm running real late on time, so I'll be able to answer the questions after all the presentations are done. So yeah, thanks for the attention.
Hi guys, I know we were trying to do the switch with the presentation from Mike Daniel from Cooper Carey who's doing a presentation about Clever. Unfortunately, we run into some bit of a technical snag in addition to not having enough time. So we actually just conferred, and what we're trying to do nowadays is that instead of asking you to stay here for another 45 minutes or so, what we're going to do is actually turn it as an online presentation. So we're planning on doing it for June 22nd at 12 noon East Coast time. It's going to be a GoToWebinar, so grab your lunch. Feel free to go ahead and join us in this presentation. So we'll give you an opportunity to do that. But meanwhile, want to thank you for coming in to join us this afternoon. But before we wrap up, just wanted to find out, do you have any questions on V-Ray or anything you learned today about virtual reality, or just want to share some best practices about what you do to your at your firm? Anybody?
So we can actually answer questions for SketchUp, Rhino, 3ds Max, everything. If you have such.
Yeah, okay, great.
Hello.
Hi.
Let's see, I got a bunch of questions, but...
Okay.
The rounded corners, can you do that with displacement?
Not currently, it's a different principle. Like the rounded corners is just a normals manipulation, okay. Whereas displacement will change the actual geometry, so it will be hard to do it with displacement.
I thought so.
At this point.
Maybe just a couple more. You said you can save with the render settings. Can that save to metadata into a EXR?
Yes. So there's some additional lines added to the VR image. We're actually using VR images and not EXRs. And the VR image allows you to write some additional data in there, which is basically your render settings. That's how it works.
Okay. And then one last question. The Cryptomat, is that the Nuke node, is that provided by V-Ray, or can you just download that?
You can just download it. I think that the Cryptomat guys, they have provided a free repository that you can download and just copy the files in your Nuke folder, and you'll get the Nuke nodes automatically.
Just a node from PsyOps site? Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
I think if you search on Google for Cryptomate, you'll be able to see the download link over there.
Any other questions? It's a very shy crowd. Well, I think that's it. On behalf of Microsol Resources, we're your local Chaos Group partner, as well as the whole team from Chaos Group. We want to thank them from coming in, not just from Maryland, which is their U.S. team. I'm not sure if you've got a chance to remember, that's Brian Russell, Corey Rubadu, somewhere in the background. It's floating around. And also we want to thank our Chaos Group partners, Constantine, Alex, thank you, and also Antonia and Nicolina, who came in from Sofia, Bulgaria. So thank you very much for hosting V-Ray Day in the USA. We're actually going to Boston next Wednesday. We're going to be joined by Moshi Safti Architects, I believe, as well as, is Mike Daniel from Cooper Carries joining us in Boston. And I am so sorry we're not able to do that live for you today, but it continues. V-Ray Day does continue online. And as I mentioned, for those that are on Facebook Live that didn't hear the conversation that we're doing here, we're unable to do the presentation with Mike Daniel from Cooper Carry, but we want to invite you to join us online instead on June 22nd at 12 noon East Coast time. And we shall send you the GoToWebinar invites. So I'm actually, again, Annalisa Montenegro from Microsol Resources, and we've got Stephen Costa over there, as well as Warren Wolf, Brandon Burkholder, Tara Picaro, and Miriam Schreier, who you met at the introductions. And also wanted to thank Iris VR for coming in. Actually, I'm not sure if you're familiar, but they only had 24 hours to come and before they realized they were going to be part of V-Ray Day. So we're very glad that they had an opportunity to join us. Anna, and is Shane still here? Yes, and also Harry, I believe. So I want to thank you. So on behalf of Microsol Resources and Chaos Group, have a good day, and thank you very much for joining us today.
So they'll not be doing a presentation? Okay.